China is often portrayed as a giant, strong, and almost unbeatable power in Asia. But the truth is very different when it comes to the Philippines, because the Philippines is no longer the weak country people imagine. And today, the balance of power has shifted so much that China would struggle to win any war against it. And here's why. First, geography is everything in war, and the Philippines is made of more than 7,600 islands, scattered across a massive stretch of sea, making it one of the hardest countries to attack and control. Because even if an enemy takes one island, there are thousands more that remain free. And that's a nightmare for any invading force, because it means endless battles, endless supply lines, and endless costs. The seas around the Philippines are also tricky, with narrow straits, deep waters, and unpredictable weather, which favors the defenders who know the terrain better than anyone else. And history shows that invaders who underestimate islands often lose big. Second, the Philippines is not standing alone anymore because it has powerful allies, and the most important of them is the United States, which has a mutual defense treaty with Manila, meaning that if China attacks the Philippines, America is legally and militarily obligated to step in. And this completely changes the calculation, because while China has numbers, the US has unmatched global reach, aircraft carriers, submarines, and advanced fighter jets that China simply cannot match yet. This alliance alone makes a direct Chinese victory almost impossible, because Beijing would not just be fighting the Philippines, it would be fighting the strongest military in the world, plus Japan, Australia, and even some European nations that also support freedom in the South China Sea. Third, the Philippine military itself is getting stronger every year, investing in modern ships, missiles, radars, and aircraft, many supplied by its allies. And while China still has a larger army, war is not only about numbers, it is about strategy, coordination, and morale. The Philippine Armed Forces have been training with the US and other partners through massive joint exercises, learning the latest techniques in naval defense, cyber warfare, and missile operations, which means that in the event of conflict, they wouldn't be fighting like an outdated force, but as a modern coordinated team with global backup. Another reason China can't win is the rise of international law and global opinion, because the Philippines already won its case against China in 2016 at the Hague Tribunal, which ruled that China's claims over most of the South China Sea have no legal basis. And even though China rejected the ruling, the world recognizes the Philippines' rights. And this means if Beijing tries to use force, it will not only face military resistance, but also diplomatic isolation, sanctions, and economic pressure from countries that depend on those sea lanes. Economically, China is more vulnerable than it looks because its economy is slowing down, facing debt, aging population, and rising unemployment, and a war would drain resources at a terrifying rate. A full-scale conflict against the Philippines and its allies would disrupt trade routes, scare investors, and potentially collapse parts of the Chinese economy, and Beijing knows this risk very well. Meanwhile, the Philippines, though smaller, would receive massive economic and military aid from allies who have a vested interest in keeping China in check. The people factor also matters. Filipinos are known for their resilience, unity, and courage during crises, and history has shown that when threatened, they come together and fight back fiercely. This national spirit is something that cannot be measured in numbers or weapons, and it has defeated stronger enemies before. China, on the other hand, has to deal with the challenge of keeping its huge population satisfied, and a costly war with high casualties could easily trigger unrest at home, something the Chinese leadership fears deeply. Technology also plays a role. China has advanced weapons, but many of them are still untested in real war, while the US and its allies have decades of combat experience. The Philippines benefits from this because through joint defense agreements, it has access to intelligence, surveillance drones, satellite data, and modern anti-ship missiles that can threaten even China's biggest vessels. In a modern war, information is as powerful as guns, and the Philippines would have a massive advantage through allied intelligence sharing. Let's not forget that the South China Sea itself is one of the busiest trade routes in the world, carrying trillions of dollars worth of goods each year, and no country, not even China, can afford to completely disrupt it. If China starts a war there, it risks cutting itself off from vital oil imports and global markets, while the Philippines, being at the center of these sea lanes, can count on global support to keep the waters open. In other words, China would be hurting itself by starting a war it cannot sustain. The psychological factor is also crucial. China's military propaganda always shows strength, but deep inside, their leaders know that a fight with the Philippines could trigger something bigger than they can control. It could unite not just America and its allies, but also smaller Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, which also have disputes with China. In such a scenario, China would be facing not one country, but a coalition, making its chances of winning close to zero. And then there is the simple fact that the Philippines has already proven it can stand up to China without even firing a shot, by winning at The Hague and rallying global support. This shows that the fight is not only military, but also legal, diplomatic, and moral. And on all these fronts, the Philippines is winning. A war would only accelerate China's loss of credibility and push even neutral countries to side with Manila. If we imagine a war actually starting, the first thing that would happen is that U.S. bases in the Philippines would activate. American aircraft carriers would position themselves in the Pacific, and advanced missile defense systems would arrive. China might try to send its navy, but Philippine and allied missiles could strike them even before they get close. The airspace would be dominated by U.S. and allied jets, making it nearly impossible for China to gain control. Meanwhile, Filipino guerrilla-style tactics on the islands would make it impossible for Chinese troops to fully occupy the territory. Even cyber warfare would favor the Philippines and its allies, because the U.S. has superior cyber capabilities, capable of shutting down Chinese communication, satellites, and even parts of its power grid. China, of course, would retaliate, but the technological gap remains wide, and this would cripple its ability to fight effectively. Long-term, the Philippines holds another ace: demographics. It has a young, growing population, full of energy and determination, while China is facing a shrinking, aging population that will struggle to support a prolonged war. Wars are not just won by weapons, but by the will and capacity of people, and here the Philippines has the advantage of time and vitality. All of these reasons combined make one thing clear: China cannot win a war against the Philippines anymore. What looked possible decades ago is no longer realistic today. The world has changed, alliances have strengthened, technology has advanced, and the courage of the Filipino people shines brighter than ever. Beijing knows this, which is why, despite its threats and posturing, it stops short of an all-out war. The Philippines is not just a small island nation to push around anymore. It is a key player in Asia with the backing of the most powerful nations on Earth. And this is the truth. China fears the most, because it is not just about military defeat, but about the collapse of its image as a rising, unstoppable power. Losing to the Philippines, or even failing to win, would destroy the myth of Chinese dominance and inspire other nations to resist. That is why China cannot and will not win a war against the Philippines anymore, because such a war is unwinnable from the start, a battle they cannot afford to fight, and one they would almost certainly lose.